I should have stopped you at the beginning, but after you introduced yourself and talked about how many bucks you had in the record books, I'm like, everybody should just pause and acknowledge that there probably won't be a more epic introduction to a guest on the Huntxp podcast.
I don't think so. Well, I was thinking amazing. The same thing. I was like, that was the best ever, and you just so nonchalantly was like, yeah, you got this many bucks in the record book. I was like,
it's amazing.
Wow.
Let's go. Let's go.
Welcome to episode 10. You guys, 10 episodes. We got with us today Jeremiah Stavney and Johnny on the pod tonight. I'm excited we made it to 10. This is like, I don't know, double digits feels like next level to me. And why it feels next level to me is we've just got a legend on tonight. I'm just going to go out and say it. Like, you may not have heard of this guy, but if you have, you know the hunting prowess that this guy has. John Eberhart is going to be on the podcast with us. And I went on a deep dive rabbit hole of John's content probably 2 or 3 years ago as I was getting back into hunting. And he just spits out knowledge and tidbits. And he's got the multiple wolves of mounts to back up his prowess. And he's so generous with his expertise. And he's so generous to come on a podcast like ours. So stay tuned. If you're a public land hunter or you're a ask permission hunter in the upper Midwest, he primarily hunts in Michigan. So this is the guy you want to learn from. So stay tuned. In the meantime, before we get John on the pod, Johnny, how are you doing, man? How was your holidays?
They were good. We were all over the place. We traveled for a teacher, like holiday break is awesome because you get to rest and recuperate. However, we traveled the whole time and some of us got sick. Flights were delayed. I was texting you, JD. I was like, we're in the airport for 5 hours. But you know what? It was all good. It was a great break. Got to see like tons and tons of family. So it was wonderful. Yeah.
I was also texting Johnny 2 days ago at the end of Wisconsin season, a picture of me, 25 feet in the tree with every piece of gear that I have on in it must have been 5 degrees.
Yeah.
And the text was, remind me to shoot a buck in early season so I don't have to deal with this.
Yep. No kidding. It was a good picture. I liked it.
Did you know that you can use AI to become a better hunter? Here's what you got to do. Our team at Huntxp has built a custom AI. We call it Crockett. And it is the combination of the power of AI and the collective wisdom of hunters for many years mashed up together and put right in your pocket, right in the field where you can level up your hunting game. You can ask it things like, what's the best broadhead setup for my situation? What's the best day to hunt this week? All sorts of questions. You can take pictures of the snake you almost stepped on in South Dakota and say, is this a rattlesnake? That's something that actually happened to us. It's super fun. Our community is having a great time building this. We'd love for you to join in at huntxp.com. Join us.
Jeremiah, you're back, man. Tell us what you've been up to.
Thanks for having me back. No, it's since I last see you guys. Obviously, I had some rest of hunting season. I shot a pretty cool buck with my rifle, Wisconsin season, and then filled 2 more tags. So it's been Operation Venison. But yeah, work-wise, it's been really busy. I was in Texas for a week recording a really, really cool film that we'll have released sometime in the next 6 months or so. But Billy was out at hunting and shot a javelina with his bow. Super cool. West Texas, very mountainous. And it's kind of the busy season for editing. So I'm finishing our film that we recorded in Alaska this past July is due at the end of this month. And then, just going to be editing hard and don't have any work plan trips until the fall. So it's going to be a big season of edit, produce. But excited.
And hang out with the dudes on the Huntxp podcast.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's go.
That is true. It's been I missed you guys, but it's been a busy couple months since I last saw you for sure.
Yeah. Can you, for those of us who don't know, what is an audette? Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, it's a sheep, and so
Okay.
it's like what I understand, I'm no expert, but learned a little bit while I was there. People brought them over, and now we saw 150-ish in 3 days.
Wow.
So if you get a 30-inch ram is like a true trophy. He said it's like shooting a 180-inch buck. And so Billy shot a 32-incher. So I guess it's closer to like just a really, really sweet sheep. So
Yeah.
but yeah, they're really cool looking.
Good stuff. Well, let's do some shout outs and checking the comms. First shout out goes to Dave Schmidt, who commented on our Spotify podcast that he has watched every single episode.
Wow.
I think because Johnny was like, if you have listened to these, please tell us. And he sure did. So shout out to you, man. Cheers. Also shout out to the Whitetail Adrenaline crew. I texted these guys. I was like, it's a good day when the Whitetail Adrenaline crew shares one of your posts. You feel affirmed as a hunting social media person when guys with that kind of credibility are liking your stuff.
It's true.
Yeah, it's awesome.
If you did not listen to the last episode with TC Worley, who films for them, that was awesome. I know Jeremiah, before he pressed record, was like, I'm listening to that. And we'll get those two together. We'll connect you guys. But it's really cool to hear from that perspective. I know we got some comments on Jude's first buck, which was a super fun video that Johnny put together for us.
Yeah, my Jude's hilarious. I was just upstairs and I was like, hey, I got to go downstairs. I got to shoot the podcast. And he goes, hey, when do I get to be on the podcast to talk about my buck? And I was like, well, maybe we can line that up.
There you go.
Let me talk to the producer.
Yeah, I was like, I know a guy.
Yeah.
I know a guy.
Yeah,
but
that's good.
I mean, you guys, you get it, like the excitement of shooting a buck, any buck. But I mean, just think, if you can think back to when you shot your first one. I know we covered that, I think, like in one of the first episodes. But he feels like the king of the world, and he still does, and it's super exciting. Yep. So it's been really fun as dad to kind of walk him through that and be a part of that experience. It's just incredible.
So I'm curious, you two, the next 2 to 3 months, are you doing anything hunting wise? I mean, we got we might do some predator hunting. I know Johnny and Jeremiah, you're invited if you want to come. But other than that, like any whitetail related, turkey related things that you guys are doing in the next few months in this kind of quote unquote downtime?
Yeah. So, I mean, on my own property where I live, I've got the turkeys pretty well figured out. Like, I know where they like to roost. I know where they like to travel. So my focus this time of year is typically on whitetail, even though that season's far off. I mean, you guys get it, and I know people listening get it. Like, if you want to be successful, it's kind of a year-round thing. So I will be looking for antlers coming up here soon. And while looking for antlers, taking note of bedding areas, sign from this year that I didn't see, or in new areas, just checking for sign like rubs and things like that would maybe give me an indication of where mature bucks have been or where they've been traveling. So that's what I'll be doing.
Yeah, I'll definitely want to do some scouting. There's a couple of spots I hunted this fall for both bow and rifle. Just learned a lot of, like, walking out. I remember specifically actually while dragging this buck out, I'll like walk through a different spot that I hadn't walked through before on the way to the truck. And like, there's this giant rub line. I'm like, you're kidding. But then if you sit back and look at these spots, you're like, well, duh. And so I want to do some scouting in 2 particular areas that I hunt quite a bit. And that have a reason to believe that the 2 biggest bucks that I was hunting this year are alive. And so, I mean, unless the wolves get them or something like that, they were alive after rifle season, which is 90% play there. So got some scouting. Just kind of, I still have the cell cameras out. Most of them have died, but I'm just trying to see what's alive and what's made it in some of the spots. But I'll go collect those sometime this spring and get them set up for next summer.
Yeah, I actually learned this from John, our guest tonight. I had always done scouting like last minute summertime, but he is a big proponent of getting out February through March when the snow melts in your area, because the traffic and the sign has been preserved under the snow.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. So he has said that he does most of all his scouting and site prep. Like he's so intensive with it that he won't go into places from like May till season, and he'll get a site completely prepped in March with shooting lanes, because the foliage is better representative of when he's actually going to go in there in November. So there's a little John Eberhart teaser for you right there.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of the man, let's bring him on the pod. We ready for him?
Let's bring him on.
There you are, man.
Hey, object. Now you can see my old, ugly, mossy oak cardigan sweater.
Dude, I like it.
It's all coming back.
I'm wearing my, this is like old school Realtree stuff right here.
I had
should
a guy
probably be
offer
wearing that.
me $500 for this stupid sweater. I got 2 of them because
No way.
They didn't make a lot of these back when Mossy Oak first started making clothing. This was actually made. Toxie Hayes is the one that invented Mossy Oak, and he owned the clothing company. So this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So who we got here? Jeremiah, JD, and Johnny.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good.
And this podcast was going to be on beating up the TV guys.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, I mean,
Love it.
Remember what it
Someone
was
got
going to
it.
be about. I did one this morning. So
I got to tell you, man, we're big fans of yours. Everybody on this
Thank
call has learned
Absolutely.
a ton from you, even though we haven't met you. And I think we were all, even before you came on, we're just like, man, he's so generous with his knowledge. We so appreciate how you like just do a podcast with people you've never met before, and you're like, let's talk this, and here's what everybody's doing wrong. And it just, I think all of us would say that we pretty quickly picked up, like, this is the real deal. Like, this is like, I'm going to learn a lot from this guy. So we already have. So we'll probably just ask you questions to help our audience learn from you. And then we selfishly have questions
well,
we want to ask you too. So
what makes me most fulfilled is I've spent a lot of times in the woods. I've hunted in a lot of different scenarios. I've been in the industry 50 years, and it fulfills me internally when I can give what I feel is good instructions for people hunting regular properties and make them more successful, because hunters spend so much money and so much time, and time is valuable nowadays, especially if you have a family. And if I can shorten the learning curve and make people more successful, that's what I like to do.
Man, we appreciate that a ton. Absolutely.
I know that at least one of these guys, and Jeremiah could probably say the same thing, I got to give you credit for, because there's certainly tactics that I use that I learned from you. So,
well,
appreciate it.
I'll tell you what, and I tell this to everybody that says that, and I've gotten that quite a bit. I can only lay out information. It takes a hunter willing to listen to it and put forth the effort to do it to make it work. So even though I may have given you some information, you're the one that put it into practice and made it work. And that's what counts.
Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, first off, thank you for the offer. I always like to go on anybody's podcast, because you guys spend a lot of time putting on podcasts, and if I can give some information that's helpful to somebody, that's what I like to do. But I've been bow hunting 58 seasons. I live in Michigan, which has always been statistically the most heavily bow hunted state in the country as far as license sales. And I have 37 bucks in the 36 bucks in the Michigan record book, and then I have 21 Pope and Young bucks from out of state. So I've got 57 total record book bucks, and I've exclusively hunted on public, walk-on, or knock-on doors for free permission properties all my life. I've never paid a dime to hunt any place, never hunted over bait, never hunted over food plots. Everything I do is natural settings against typically heavy competition, unless I'm out of state. And I do whitetail workshops. I've got a website with all my podcasts are pretty much on my website. You can just click on them and hear them. And got a YouTube channel. I think I just posted my 137th YouTube show about 20 minutes ago.
Wow.
So
yeah.
So anyway, yeah. And I've written 3 books.
Yeah.
God, I should sure talk about this. I've written 3 previous books. I wrote one in 2003, 2005, and 2010. Bow hunting pressured whitetails in 2003, precision bow hunting in 2005, bow hunting whitetails the Eberhart way in 2010. So it's been a long time since I've written a book, and I retired from my job as a sales rep in the hunting, fishing, and camping industry in December of 2022. And in January 2023, I started writing a new book. Greg Godfrey wrote a small fraction of it in the saddle hunting chapter, but I wrote it it took me 18 months. I worked on it pretty much from 5 to 7 a.m. until 9 or 10 at night. Every night I was home. So I have well in excess of 5,000 hours into it. I didn't hold anything back. All my other books were within that 250 page count. And this book, I just wrote everything in super detail. I didn't leave out anything, and it ended up being 800 pages.
Nice.
Love it. Love it.
It obviously could not be put into a single book, so we had to do it in 3 volumes. So it's called Ultimate Guide to DIY Bucks. I did request some friends of mine to write some very small hunting kill stories. Mark Kenyon wrote, I think, 2. Garrett Prawl from DIY Sportsman wrote 3. He wrote 3 condensed article or kill stories. Ernie Power and Greg Godfrey each wrote 3, and they're co-owners Tethered. And then Andy May, he wrote 3. Andy's just he's from Michigan. He hunts a lot out of state, and he's just a big buck killer. And I think I've got 70 kill stories in it, wherever they fit the information in that particular chapter. And I have them here if you want to look at covers or something. You do?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll do it.
Absolutely, we do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Before you show us, I have a big bone to pick with Santa, because that was the number 1 ask on my Christmas list this year. And it didn't happen. My birthday is in April, and that is the only thing I'm asking for is the book you're about to show us.
Well,
I'm not even kidding.
They're hard to.
Not even kidding.
I appreciate that, Jeremiah. This is book volume 1. It's 2 bucks fighting. This is volume 2, just a big buck kind of standing in the timber. And then this is volume 3, and that's just a big buck walking through the timber. And when all 3 of these books are put together and on the shelf, they form a picture of a buck on the spine.
Oh, cool.
Oh, there you go.
So if you're missing a book, the buck's going to be either missing his ass, the middle of his body, or his head. If you're missing a book.
That's good.
So anyway.
John, is that your magnum opus, or do you got more you want to write?
I'm done writing. I mean, I'm going to write a lot of hunting articles going forward, because I can pull a ton of hunting articles out of these books. There's 27 chapters in these books. They cover everything. There isn't anything in deer hunting or whitetail hunting across the country, terrain feature-wise, that this is not cover. That's cool. In my opinion, this is going to be the holy grail of a deer hunting book series.
Where do people buy this? Where do people buy this where you get the best cut? Is it on Amazon, or should they buy it directly from you?
Not on Amazon yet, JD, and that's one thing that really kind of bums me out. They're only available through Tethered. So they'll be on Amazon this year, probably sometime by late winter, early spring. I'm also doing an audiobook. I will be doing it myself. That'll take me at least a month to do, and it will be available on an ebook. But right now, they're only available at www.tethard.com/DIY bucks.
It'll be down in the description. I'll make sure that it's in the description on Spotify and YouTube for people to find. I should have stopped you at the beginning, but after you introduced yourself and talked about how many bucks you had in the record books, I'm like, everybody should just pause and acknowledge that there probably won't be a more epic introduction to a guest on the Huntxp podcast.
I don't think so.
Well,
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, that was the best ever. And you just so nonchalantly was like, yeah, you got this many bucks in the record book. I was like,
it's amazing.
Wow.
Well,
yeah, it's pretty
awesome. A
awesome.
little bit on the arrogant side. because I do think I have an ego. A lot of people think I'm cocky and an asshole, but I'm very confident in what I do. And I will say this, a lot of the TV guys have, lots of them have over 57 book books. Some of them have, I'm sure, a couple hundred. They hunt in multiple states every year. But they're always hunting ultra-managed properties where pretty much 50+% of any bow hunter across the country could hunt on the same properties and kill the same deer they're killing. I don't view them as proficient deer hunters. If they had to hunt public land by sitting in a box line over a picked cornfield and expect to shoot a big buck, they're not going to kill anything. So I will say I don't think you'll ever have anybody else on here because I don't think anybody else has ever killed 57 book bucks on public, walk-on, or free permission properties. That's the air card
Absolutely.
sticking out.
Well, John, we're only going to scratch the surface, but we want to get into it a little bit and ask you some questions about what's been behind your success. And then I want to ask you some questions too about what you're thinking about now, because your hunted career spans quite some time, and I'm sure there's been changes in that too, or maybe there hasn't, and that's worth noting. First of all, I just want to start us off with the 3 biggest mistakes that public land or ask for permission hunters are making right now that if they changed, they would up their success almost immediately.
Number 1, by leaps and bounds, there's not even a close number 2, is scent control. Activated carbon lined clothing, where you do not have to pay attention to wind direction. And the nose of a deer is their main defense, and when you don't have to worry about the nose of a deer and you can hunt any location you want, anytime you want, without having to worry about being winded, that's the biggest game changer since compound bow, or since crossbow. You guys are on the crossbow. I'm not a scent lock guy. Everybody thinks, oh, scent lock must be paying him because he always talks about scent lock. Scent lock just happens to own the patent on using activated carbon in hunting clothes. Nobody else can use it unless they have their permission and they pay them a huge royalty. So everybody else says it doesn't work. And just to give you an example, from 1965, when I started bow hunting, through 1996, when I was hunting 100% attention to wind, according to wind direction. I hunted everything according to the wind. I killed 8 book bucks in those 32 seasons. 8 book bucks. From 1997, when I started properly caring for, storing, and using scent lock clothing in conjunction with other scent-free items like rubber boots, washing my aiders. So I got fabric aiders on my sticks. Washing backpacks. If you have a regular backpack that's not scent lock, you have to wash that in scent-free detergent, keep it in an airtight tote. Washing the fabric on your rattle bag. Anything that's fabric. If you're using a wrist release, you got to wash that in scent-free detergent. If you're using a saddle, you have to wash that in scent-free detergent, hang it outside for a couple of days, let it air dry. But when you do all of that and you don't have to pay attention to the wind, that's a huge game changer. Number 1, and most hunters, I've done a ton of seminars, and I always, when I'm doing a seminar, when I start talking about scent control, I ask the audience, okay, how many of you people in here have used scent lock clothing? Typically, at least half of the hands go up. Okay, how many of you people in here use scent lock clothing that have used scent lock clothing got winded? A minimum of 3/4 of the hands that went up that were using scent lock clothing went back up. They get winded. Okay. I said, I expect that. I expect that because they're not knowledgeable on how to take care of it and how to use it. So then I say, okay, now how many of you guys that have used it and got winded, how many of you wore head cover with a drop-down face mask? Very few of those hands went back up because most guys, when they were using scent lock clothing, which was usually 5 to 10, 15 years ago when it first came out, and the TV guys, there was a lot of TV guys using it. The TV guys were wearing a scent lock jacket, scent lock pants, and boots, rubber boots, and they would wear a logo cap like all 3 of you guys and myself is wearing right now. They would have beards, just like you do, JD, just like you do, Johnny, and they were exposed. Their faces were exposed. Their necks were exposed. They had hair hang dangling down below their hat. and their hat was a regular hat. It has odor on it. 40% of your odor comes out of your head. So if you're not wearing a sunlock activated carbon lined head cover with a drop down face mask that covers everything except here, it covers your neck, that's tucked down into your jacket. If you're not wearing that, your scent control's gone out the window already. So if you're not wearing that, it's gone. So then there would be people, I'd say, okay, so you people that did wear head covers and did wear sunlock jackets and pants, how many of you that still got winded, how many of you used a backpack? All of their hands went up. All of the guys that had used sunlock and had a head cover with a drop-down face mask and still got winded, their hands went up. I said, okay, you obviously did not have a sunlock backpack, which they all agreed they did not. I said, how many of you washed your backpack in scent-free detergent frequently during the season and kept it in an airtight container? None of them. I mean, almost on every seminar, I can't remember one guy that had a backpack that washed it in scent-free detergent and stored it in an airtight container. So you're getting into a backpack every day, reloading it after each hunt with your bare hands. You've got a huge scent wick in the tree with you. And then when you get winded, what do? Well, the scent lock didn't work. So it's something that Scentlock has done a horrendous job, in my opinion, of educating hunters. Because hunters that follow what the TV guys do and expect that they're hunting in public land or, walk on properties that have a lot of hunting pressure, if they practice the same things that TV guys do and use the same methods they're using, they're not going to kill squat. So you can't watch TV and replicate what they're doing if you're hunting pressured property. Okay, so scent control was number one. To me,
John, can I ask you a small question? Because I use scent lock stuff, and I also wear glasses, which it looks like you do.
So you're talking.
What's your fog solution?
I get
for that.
I get that question a lot, and I'm going to have a really dumb answer for you because I don't wear my glasses when I'm hunting. When I'm shooting at a deer, I'm shooting with a blurry pin at a blurry deer. Not so blurry that I can't make out how points they have. But when you're hunting whitetails, if you're a good bow hunter, your shots are typically within 20 yards.
So if the intro is not enough, let me just clarify. You got all those book bucks that you shot with a blurry view through a blurry pin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My pin is, when I'm looking through my peep sight, my pin is definitely blurry, and so is the deer. Now, my distance vision is better than close, so the pin is super blurry.
Sure.
The deer is not quite as blurry, but both of them are blurry to a point. But
that's better than having foggy glasses and not seeing anything.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. And I shoot a big peep sight. I shoot a 1/4-inch peep. So I want a big hole so I can shoot in lower light. But you're shooting at a 14-inch bullseye, typically. The lung area and liver area on a deer is 14 inches. So you're shooting at a pretty big target, usually under 20 yards. So it's not that big of a deal. I can shoot at my deer target out here at 20 yards and, I can keep them in a 3-inch circle all day long.
Maybe the next challenge for you, John, is to shoot them with your eyes closed and give them a chance.
Please.
That's good.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's awesome.
Good.
I mean, we take this too seriously. I mean, everybody thinks everything's got to be perfect. And when it comes to your locations and your scent control, all that stuff, it does. But when you're shooting at a big animal, a little bit of a blurry pin is not that big of a deal. Now, I don't know if you're farsighted or nearsighted, so I don't know how that would affect you.
Yeah, that wouldn't work for me, but
Okay.
I'm the opposite.
Now, the only thing you could do if you're wearing sunlock and you do have issues with your glasses would be to have somebody stitch in a metal piece right here, and that way it would be bendable to your nose. Or you could do this.
Lace it.
Or you could do this. You could pull your head cover underneath your nose and breathe through your mouth.
That's what I do.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll typically put it right under my nose.
Yeah. And that's fine. As long as you breathe, as long as you breathe through your mouth. I mean, there's a lot of times when I'm sitting in a tree, I'll have my head cover underneath my mouth even. And then if I've got a decent visual, and then if I see something coming in, then I'll pull it up over my nose, mouth or nose, and breathe.
Makes sense.
I stopped you. You were going to go to number 2 and 3.
Okay,
Why don't
number
you
2
hit
would
us with
be
those?
personally for me my second biggest change that immediately made an impact on my kill percentage would be hunting out of the saddle, and I did that in 1981. That opened up a plethora of new trees that I could hunt. I could hunt leaning trees, I could hunt fat trees, I could hunt skinny trees. I could prep 50 trees to see. I'd have 50 trees prepped every season, and I hunt all of them out of the same saddle. I'm not leaving a stand in the tree, so on public land, I'm not worried about anybody stealing it or hunting out of it when I'm not there. I can shoot 360 degrees around any tree, even big trees. It just does a lot of things for you. I can hide behind a tree, like if I'm hunting at a destination location. Let's say I'm hunting at a white oak tree, or what state are you guys in?
Wisconsin primarily.
I'm familiar with apple trees. A lot of times you're hunting timber and it used to be pasture 50, 60 years ago, and there may be a lost apple tree here and there. So if you're hunting at an apple tree or a white oak that's dropping acorns, my trees are always set up where I'm 180 degrees on the backside of the tree that I'm sitting in from the deer.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got the total tree in front of me blocking my visual from the destination spot or scrape area, because there's going to be multiple deer standing there. They could be there for 20, 30 minutes at a time. And if you got 3 or 4, 5, 6 deer, does and fawns, and maybe a subordinate buck feeding, if you're in a tree stand, you have to be kicked off to the side a little bit so you can shoot to that direction. You can't be on the opposite side of the tree because you can't see them because it's behind your head, and you can't shoot on the opposite side of the tree if it's a very big tree. So with the saddle, you can sit there on the back side of the tree, totally hidden from the deer, because when deer eat, they pick up whatever they're eating, they chew on it, and they're looking around, and their ears are moving. They're always looking if you're in a pressured area, as you guys well know if you're from Wisconsin. So,
John, can I ask you a question that came up as you were describing that? Is your approach like early season white oak and apple trees, food source, and then late October scrapes during the rut, hinge points, and then late season food source again? Or do you have a different approach to what you're targeting?
I'd say over 50% of my kills have been scrape area related, primary scrape area related. So early season, I key on food, which is exactly what you said, apple trees and white oaks primarily, and red oaks. If the white oaks aren't dropping, red oaks, I'll hunt at red oaks as well, that are dropping food. Typically, because that's where does are feeding, typically by season. In our season, I know yours opens September 15th, ours opens October 1st. So I do a speed tour, okay? Typically, it's after September 20th. Most of the mature bucks rub out by September 5th. Most big bucks are rubbed out. They're hard antler. So I do a speed tour after September 20th, and I do a speed tour of only my early season hunting locations. So they're going to be at mass trees or fruit trees or at scrape areas. So I'm checking the trees. I'm totally flat in scent lock. I'm going through. I'm not prepping anything. I'm just walking and checking them to see if they're dropping food. If they are dropping food, what kind of droppings are under the tree? Is there any, because by September 20th, they've been rubbed out for 2.5 weeks. There's going to be rubs around the area. And if there's a lot of does visiting those, destination locations, then there's typically going to be scrapes there, even before October. Now, I don't know if they're going to be that much sign there before September 15th as far as buck sign, because that's a shorter window, from when the bucks have rubbed out. So you'd have to do a speed tour like on September 10th, 12th, or 13th. So, but I've got, 2.5 weeks to let the bucks lay sign, and then I will go in and check all my early season locations, which I may have 20 of them or 25. And then according to the buck sign that's there, whether it be scrapes or rubs, how high the rubs are up on the trees, that's how I plan which trees I'm going to hunt during the early season. Or if the scrape area is active, and I can tell by the scrapes being super active, typically it's mature bucks that open up the scrapes early. So I know that's going to be opened by at least a 2.5-year-old buck, bucks that have been through a breeding season already. So yeah, that's what I hunt during the early season. It's primarily food locations, and typically they have scrapes around them in the very near area. And then during the lull, which I consider the lull to be like October 4th or 5th through October 20th, typically where I'm at on public lands, most of the bucks are nocturnal before season because there's so much preseason scouting and location preparation by all the other hunters hunting the public land. So typically they're nocturnal before season even opens. But once in a while, if I'm back in an area deep enough that, there hasn't been anybody booger it up, I'll have an opportunity at an early season buck. But usually by the third or the fourth, anything I want to kill is going to be nocturnal outside of their bedding area during daylight hours. They're just not moving outside their bedding area during the daylight. So then I turn to hunting bedding areas. And I hunt a lot of standing corn from that October 5 through October 20 time frame. A lot of hunters are afraid to hunt standing corn because they don't know how to hunt it. So what I will typically do, I will have locations set up on the side of crop fields. Let's say public land butts up to a crop field. Well, I'll have something ready marked on Huntxp, and if that crop field is in corn that year, early season, it's typically going to be standing, or during that middle of October, it's still standing. So I will have a location set up where there's going to be standing corn butting up to the public land, and on the public land side, there's going to be some semblance of security cover. So I'm going to get in a tree. I'll have a tree ready pretty much, and I'll do sparring sequences because I know the preseason hunting pressure or the preseason scouting pressure plus that early season hunting pressure has pushed those big bucks into the cornfields. And it's not that difficult to rattle. I shouldn't say rattle, spar. You don't rattle during that time of year. You make sparring sequences, and there is a difference. To spar bucks out of standing corn. 2 years ago, I sparred 16 bucks out of standing corn by the 15th of October. In 10 days.
Yeah.
Real quick, bar and rattle for our listeners.
Rattle is what you see on TV. That's where you take antler or your rattle bag and you just pound them
Smash
together. Just loud crash. And if you're hunting in a pressured area, there's not going to be a lot of those monster bucks like you see on TV banging their antlers. That spooks more bucks in a pressured area than it will draw in. Because there's just not a lot of big bucks to make that kind of noise.
Yeah.
So you got to do sparring sequences. Sparring sequences, I'm sure all three of you guys have been out and you've heard or seen buck spar, where you'll have, 10 point, 8 point come up and spar with a 4 or 4 point spar with a 6 point. And they just kind of come up. And this is, typically preseason or early in the season, and they'll just push their antlers together. They're not horns, they're antlers. And they'll just tickle them a little bit, and then they'll just push for dominance, and then they'll separate, and they'll flick them again together. And you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sparring sequence. And bucks come into that because they're inquisitive. Because during that early season, even for you guys, September 15th, all that period, all the way through until pre-rut, bucks are sparring for dominance. They're not all out fighting. They only fight when they get into the breeding period. When they fight for breeding rights, that's totally different than sparring sequences where they're just figuring out the pecking order of the local herd. So you've got to be subtle, and that's what a sparring sequence is. It's going to be, you make an initial clash, and you may grind your bag together for maybe 10 seconds, and then you go to dead quiet for 10 or 15 seconds. Then you do it again. You may do 3 or 4 of those noise sequences for 10 or 15 seconds and have as much quiet periods in between. But it's not this all out, big horns and make rattling noises, because that's going to spook more deer. You got to keep in mind, when you're watching TV shows, they have a lot of monster bucks on their properties. They don't target a buck till it's 4 or 5 years old. So you don't have to be smart to kill them because there's no hunting competition on those properties either. So whenever you've got a lot of mature bucks in an area, they fight and spar heavily for breeding rights. So having those loud noises is common for them. When I go to Kansas, I don't do sparring sequences. I do rattle sequences. I do noisy sequences. But in Michigan, where I'm hunting, 1 out of 40 or 50 deer in the area I'm hunting has antlers that I might want to kill. That's the ratio. 1 out of 40.
Wow.
All the deer are going to be does, fawns, 1.5 and 2.5-year-old bucks. And so a mature dominant buck, he doesn't really have to do all that fighting with another big buck because they just don't exist. There's just not that many of them. Sometimes I'll scout public land and hunt public land a few times, and there's not a buck on the property I even want to kill. I mean, there's just not that many mature bucks. And that also plays a big part in the rut, too, because when it gets to peak rut, hunting mature bucks in a state like Michigan and on public land in Wisconsin is very difficult when it gets to peak rut. Pre-rut, not so much. Pre-rut's the best. But peak rut, because there's so few dominant bucks, they're damn near always locked up with a hot doe. And when they finish the doe's estrus cycle, which is usually 28 to 32 hours, because the ratio is so skewed of does to bucks, and then does to especially mature bucks is so skewed, it doesn't take him long to find another estrus doe. And if she's with another 1.5 or 2.5-year-old buck, they've already done the dominance, the pecking order thing. He just takes them away. There's not even a fight. She's hot. He just feels her. And so they're doed up so damn much. And when bucks are doed up, there's no routine to how they move. They're pushing her into the bedding area, and he'll breed her, and then 20 minutes later he'll breed her again, and she'll do a little chase thing in the bedding area, and she'll bed down. He'll bed down 10 to 15 yards, downwind of her if there's high weeds, and then 20 minutes he'll get up and go over and nudge her, and she'll get up and do the chase thing for 30 to 100 yards in the bedding area, and then he'll breed her again, and that happens all day long. So there's no rhyme or reason to why, to their routine.
So in those scenarios, John, you just want to get in the middle of the game.
I want to get in.
Is that right? Yeah, you're just in the bedding area, and you want to get some luck, some skill putting yourself in that bedding area. So as that pushing around is happening, you get an opportunity.
100% correct. When it's peak rut, and I consider peak rut to be like November 15th through probably November 22nd, 23rd. When it's peak rut, I'm in a bedding area. Mature bucks, they will physically force the does. They'll corral the does in the bedding area, and they'll breed her in there all day long. At night they'll go out into the open, but in the daytime they want to be in the heavy security cover. Everything.
And I think it's you've said before, I think from something I heard, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but does will actually come to mature bucks bedding areas.
Absolutely.
Is that correct? So they don't even have to move in some instances. They'll come to them.
Well, that doesn't mean they don't have to move, because typically when a does are coming into heat, there's, like a 2.5-week window when all the does in the area, the majority of the does in the area are coming into heat. So she may come in to where she knows he visits the primary scrape area frequently when he's not with a hot doe and lay her line down. But that doesn't mean he's going to be there within the next day, because he may be with a hot doe someplace else.
Got it. So your scrape area is pre-rut, bedding area, rut, and then do you move back to food source around the end of November?
Around the end of November. Well, in Michigan, the gun season starts November 15. So, November's worthless for me.
Yeah, you're done.
And it's just gotten to the point where, if you're hunting public land, hunting after gun season for a mature buck is nearly a waste of time. I mean, after gun season, they are so damn nocturnal, and they're so deep into the bedding area, and it's December, everything's noisy, the leaves are noisy, unless you got a fresh snow. It's just really difficult. What I try to do in December is go out of state, to be perfectly honest with you. I hunt post-rut out of state, late season, into Illinois. My son and I just got back from Kansas on our return trip, because my son John and I did not kill anything. My son Joe killed 197 inches.
Whoa.
Dang. On the first trip, to Kansas in November. And John and I didn't kill anything. We passed up some Pope and Youngs, but we were after some bigger ones. And we just returned 3 or 4 days ago. I shot one the day after gun season ended with my bow, 141 incher, and John shot 161 incher on 4 days after their gun season ended. But we just got that.
And your tactic there in late season in Kansas or Illinois is food source. And is that typically, what is that in those areas like? Is that like a tree that they're coming to when other food sources are gone? Or is that, what does that look like for you? What kind of food source is it?
Where we were just at in Kansas, there is no quote unquote mass trees that are dropping acorns and stuff like that. Yeah. So they have crop fields. So out in Kansas also, they have draws. They have old floodplain draws. Are any of you guys familiar with that at all?
Yep.
Johnny? Okay. These floodplains draws, they're thousands and thousands of years old. So over those years, every time they get hard rains and floods, they've just eroded the soil. And every half mile, whatever the case may be, you'll find these deep ravined floodplains draws. Other than that, everything's just flat up on top, where it's either prairie or it's crops. And those floodplains draws are the only places deer have with any semblance of security cover to move during daylight hours. So that's where all the and that's where they bet. Because those floodplains draws, because they have more moisture in them, because they're lower ground, they have hemp in them, tall weeds, hemp, plum brush. That's where all the security cover is. So basically what we were doing in December is we would go in these floodplains draws, and there may be huge cottonwoods, there's Osage orange trees, there's locust trees, and we'll just walk the draws until we find a pinch, because the draws will, some areas they're 100 yards wide, sometimes they may be 150 yards wide, and some areas that are 40 yards wide. So you just walk until there's a pinch point, and then you set up there in the middle of the pinch point, because the does and the bucks, they transition through those draws going to crop fields. They're bedding in the draws, and they're also transitioning. So you just find the narrowest spot. Usually there's going to be a lot of scrapes in the narrowest spot because it's pinching the doe activity, and all scrape activity is made around where does are at. So we just find the pinch points and hunt set up in those pinch points between bedding and feeding. Now,
I just want to pause and go ahead.
Back up a little bit. In Illinois, is different. Like in 2007 and 2008, I went to Illinois in the late season. I don't know why I haven't went back, but I shot a 120-inch, didn't make book, 9-point in 2007 and 160-inch 12-point in 2008. And those were all after their gun season on public land, too. Those were at food locations. They were at locust trees that were dropping those big, long brown beans. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Because once there's snow on the ground, that becomes a major food source because it covers up all the acorns and all the crops. And they don't touch those locust beans in the fall. But in the winter, when you get 6-8 inches plus of snow, they can just make one paw and, half a dozen of those big, long bean pods pop up out of the snow.
So do you wait for snow in the forecast specifically to jet down there?
I not only wait for it, I call the park ranger to verify it. So my van during season is always loaded. I can take off on a moment's notice and go anywhere.
You mentioned it, so I got to stop.
What?
One of the things that I absolutely love is that you are a van guy, that you rock a Toyota Sienna, correct?
Correct.
And you got that thing decked out all season with your totes. You got all the seats out. Tell us about we're going to call it just the Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young Toyota Sienna.
Ernie Powell calls it the minivan or soccer mom van of death.
Like
there it is. That is.
I have this old Honda Odyssey that we're just going to run into the ground. And I'm like, I want to turn this into John Eberhart van 2.0 when we don't need it anymore. Yeah. And just,
they're just
awesome.
badass. I mean, how many guys, they drive a 4-wheel drive truck and they never stick the sucker in 4-wheel drive? When you're hunting, you don't drive off roads down greasy ass roads and shit. Everybody washes their 4-wheelers more than you wash a freaking car, for God's sake.
Yeah.
They worry too much about keeping it clean and not getting the tires dirty. But yeah, that's the only negative of a minivan. It's low to the ground. So you can't drive out in fields much, because if you drive over a rock, which I've done before and broke my transmission, that's not a good thing. When you take all the seats out of a minivan, it's like a mini hotel room in the back. I've got one tote with my ScentLock clothing in it. I've got another hard tote with my ScentLock backpack that's loaded, and my additional headgear and stuff, head covers. I've got a third tote. These are all hard totes that stack on top of each other if I need to. My third tote has all of my layering garments, layering undergarments. Yep. And then my fourth tote has all of my waterproof gear, Rivers West, because that's my go-to waterproof gear. I don't like ScentLock's waterproof gear. So I'll wear a ScentLock suit underneath my Rivers West, but the fourth tote is Rivers West waterproof gear. And then I have an otter sled in there. You guys know what that is, right?
Yeah.
And
I use those all the time.
Yeah.
I've drug out $2 this year with an otter sled.
Well,
it's a good day when you get to use the otter sled.
Yeah,
it's a good day.
Jet sleds are nice, but I ran, jet sleds are really thin plastic. You've seen the jet sled?
Yep.
And when you're dragging them on gravel or anything across the ground, the back corners wear out really fast. They'll get holes in the back corners, and then when you slide a deer up into your van, blood runs down there and gets on your carpet. So otter sleds are really thick plastic. So I've never worn through an otter sled. So I've got a ramp that I put in the van. The otter sled goes on top of that. And then my deer cart, which is a Versa cart, goes in my sled. And then I throw my boots in around that. So I don't do anything neat with my boots. They just are laying in my sled. Typically, I got 8 pairs of boots in my van at all times for different weather conditions. I've probably owned 30 pair of boots, but 8 of them are in my van all the time during season. So
John,
anyway,
can we just pause? I want to give... Oh, go ahead. You got more to say about the van?
Yeah, when I see a weather forecast, like for Illinois, for instance, and I see it's predicting 8 inches of rain or whatever, or snow, I will typically call the park ranger, because those parks in Illinois are big. They're 10 to 20,000 acres each, and they have park rangers. You can call the park ranger and ask them to verify that they got the snow. And if they got the snow, I'm going down. And when you go down at, within 24 hours of a fresh snow, guess what you're looking at? In December, when deer are on a bedding to feeding zone, you're looking at fresh sign. You know exactly where they're going, because it's all fresh within the last 24 hours. So you just follow the deer tracks, and sooner or later, you're going to find out where the deer are not only bedding, you're also going to find out what trees they're eating. That's how I found out deer ate the crap out of locust beans when there's snow on the ground.
That's legit.
Jeremy and Johnny, do you have any questions? I want to make sure you get the chance to jump in.
Well, let me throw in something else here, because we talked about, sparring sequences, the long-standing corn during the lull. I will also, during the lull, like, let's say I scouted 2 or 3 public lands during postseason in the spring, and they had some nice bedding areas in them, but I've got other public land areas that have better bedding areas in them. So I'm not going to hunt these new bedding areas during the rut phases. I will still go in those bedding areas during postseason, even though I know I'm not going to hunt them during the rut because I have better spots. And I'm going to pick out a couple trees, 1 or 2 trees. And then during the lull, I'm going to go in and I'm going to hunt a couple of those trees on morning sits and do sparring sequences. I'm going to be in my tree an hour and a half before daylight. I'm going to do sparring sequences, maybe half hour, 40 minutes after daylight, two different sequences, 5 minutes apart. And I've shot a couple of bucks doing that. And I'm not interfering with my rut phase locations that I'm going to be hunting later in the year. I'm not screwing anything up. And the same thing with corn. If you've got corn, if you have private property and you've got a standing cornfield, you can hunt it to your heart's content around the perimeter or even internally inside of the cornfield. And you're not interfering or intruding into your rut phase locations that you're going to hunt once the corn is harvested, because they're in the timber areas or the swamp areas off the fields. So you can hunt that to your heart's content, beat the crap out of it, and you're not hurting anything. They're like free hunts.
It's good.
Yeah, with what you were just talking and in this last bit of information. So when you go in to scout these areas, I haven't heard you mention cameras in any shape or form. Like you specifically said, like you're looking for sign, you're looking for size of rubs, height of rubs, etc. So are you like I don't use trail cameras in any way, shape, or form, and you are just you're going based off of what you see, or do you use any technology to kind of assist in that when you're not present, or you rely solely on your scouting, of course, but then those speed tours before season?
Speed tours, I put out cameras. I put out cameras in certain locations. Now, I didn't use cameras much in Michigan until, I'd say 5 years ago. I used cameras out of state a lot because deer don't react to cameras out of state like they do here. So in Michigan, once cell cameras came out, I started using cell cameras in the areas where I had service. And I usually set them up like 14. Once I say, okay, I'm going to hunt this spot, or this spot really looks good, even if it's a spot that, okay, man, I got 3 or 4 spots that are better than this one, but this might have some potential. I'll throw up a camera, and I'll usually put it up about 12 to 14 feet up a tree. So it's out of their visual, it's not at eye level, and have it, kind of looking down on the spot. So, yeah, that's very glad you brought that up, because I do use cell cameras in Michigan now. Back in the when you had to go in and physically pull an SD card, I did not use cameras, because every intrusion into a hunting location is definitely not good for killing a mature buck there.
Yeah.
Now when we would go out of state, like when we go to Kansas or Iowa, we put cameras at every one of our hunting locations, and we would, my sons go, and they always drive their own vehicles, so they each have 4-wheel drive trucks. We drive trucks right to the freaking camera. You would never do that in Michigan. We would drive right to if we could, we'd drive right to the tree where you can roll the window down and change the SD card, and it doesn't deer move out there. It's just that much easier.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so many trucks and stuff driving in the fields, and farmers messing with their cattle, and switching pastures. That kind of stuff doesn't bother those deer movements out there. It's just totally different than hunting pressured state or area like you guys have, or we, or New York, or PA, or West Virginia. It's another ballgame. It's super easy.
Yeah.
So, John, you mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
The one thing I didn't mention, pre-rut is my favorite time of season. So I look at pre-rut as being like October 25th through November 5th. That's like about a 10-day window. And during pre-rut, the testosterone levels in the mature bucks have gotten to the point where their private parts are overriding their brain. Okay, as far as security goes. And they start making mistakes, and they start moving during daylight outside of their bedding areas. And so I key on primary scrape areas, because they always put their primary scrape areas where that's multiple scrapes in a small zone where there's doe activity. So when their testosterone levels rise, their routines are checking their primary scrape areas. So I hunt a lot of primary scrape areas, and they're usually at food locations or around perimeter edges, or just inside the perimeter edges of bedding areas. But pre-rut's my favorite time, because not many does have came into estrus yet, so the mature bucks are moving during daylight hours with a routine.
Yeah.
And then once peak rut comes, that routine kind of goes out the window.
So, John, I just want to ask to clarify too, because you said that mature bucks are typically starting the scrapes early October or even earlier. So how do you key in on the scrapes?
They start way early.
Okay, so in your experience, with your speed tours, are you able to get enough intel to make a plan for pre-rut, or do you have to do more scouting in October to dial in where you want to go?
No, my speed tours have nothing to do with pre-rut whatsoever.
Okay, so how do you gather that intel?
My speed tours are strictly for early season hunting locations. Those are the only ones I speed tour. But some of my early season food locations also cross over into pre-rut.
Yeah.
So let's say I've got a white oak and it's starting to drop acorns, and I know it's dropping acorns into November, or there's 2 or 3 oaks, and they're going to be dropping acorns into November. I'm going to hunt them I may hunt there once or possibly twice during the first 5 days of October. I won't go back after that until pre-rut. I'm going to let that doe activity stew. I want that doe activity to stew. I want them to feel comfortable coming in there. I want the mature bucks to feel comfortable coming in there after dark, where those does are at after dark. And then during pre-rut, when they start thinking with their dick instead of their brain and they make mistakes, they're going to start coming in there and make mistakes and come in there in the daylight. And so during pre-ruts, when I go back and I hunt those locations again.
Fast. Did we get to number 3, or was that we derailed you into giving us your schedule?
Tangent.
Second goal and hunting out of the saddle are so much bigger than anything else. Number 3.
I just want to mention to people that if you're not in a saddle hunting yet, you can get a saddle with John's name on it if you want to from Tether.
I haven't thinking through that. I would think the number 3 thing is most people overhunt. That's one thing I have learned to do as I've aged is hunt smarter and not more frequently. Most people overhunt their locations. Most people use the wrong entry and exit routes. That's a big deal. Typically most good locations have a different entry route than it does an exit route. Like let's say I'm hunting in an apple tree and it's 60 yards inside the timber from the edge of a field. Let's say it's 100 yards inside the timber from an edge of a crop field. If it's a short crop field, first off, if I'm hunting a food location like a mass tree or a fruit tree, it's going to be strictly an evening because I'm not going to hunt a fruit or a mass tree on the mornings because I'm going to spook and deer with my entry. So that eliminates that for morning. So if I'm going to hunt it in the evening, what I'm going to do, if it's a short crop field that it butts up to, I'm going to walk probably 100 to 150 yards out into that crop field from the edge of the timber. I'm going to walk out to where I'm parallel to the tree I want to go to, and then I'm going to just make a direct route right over to the edge and go straight into the tree. Because if you walk down the edge of a crop field, typically there's going to be brush along the edge, and typically there's going to be peripheral deer bedding along the edge. And when you spook a doe or a fawn or a 4-point or a sporting buck from along that edge, well, guess which way it's going to run? It's going to run back in the direction of the buck that I may want to kill. So what's the odds? The odds are pretty decent. If a buck hears deer running from being spooked, and they can tell back farther in the timber, he's not going to get up and walk out the direction they spooked from. So I want to not walk down that field edge and spook deer. I'd rather walk out in the field and not spook deer on the field edge and just go straight over and go straight in. And then when I would leave through the woods back to my vehicle. I wouldn't go back out in the field and walk down the field edge to exit because there's deer out in the field.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you always want to have the proper entry and exit route. And a lot of people on morning hunts don't get in their tree early enough. I've found that being in your tree an hour and a half before daylight and settled in makes a big difference, especially if you're hunting in a bedding area, because you got to be in the bedding area well before the mature bucks transition into the bedding area, because they're always going to come in before daylight. Usually, 15 minutes to a half hour, 45 minutes before daylight. You got to be in there and set up so you're not spooking them with your entry.
Man, really interesting. And the part you said about overhunting, I've been extremely guilty of this in the past. And this year, I shot 2 bucks over 130, and I hunted 2 times. I went in on my first archery hunt on November 2nd, and I shot a buck over 130. And my first rifle hunt, I went in and I shot a buck over 130. I hunted for 2.5 hours total this season for myself.
Wow. You only hunted 2 times?
Well, no, here's the thing. I got a
9-year-old. One time each in those locations.
One time each, but I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I spent tons of time with them on my property hunting over and over. And my son shot his first buck this year, which was incredible. It was amazing. But the point being, I had to be really smart and really strategic, because I was like, it was November 2nd. My cell camera was giving me the info I wanted. And I'm like, I think I can kill this buck if I go tonight. And I told my wife and I told my kids, I'm hunting by myself tonight. And I went and I shot the buck. And then during rifle season opening day, my cell cams were giving me good info as well, heavily pressured kind of areas. And I'm like, I want to be where I think a buck's going to want to retreat to. And I set up and I shot a buck. So I hunted twice for myself and I shot 2 real big bucks this year. Big for me.
Wow. You only hunted 2 times?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in those 2 locations, 1 time each in those locations. Well, 130 is big for anybody. 130 is a
true.
big buck. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
That's a nice
Definitely.
deer. And, that's awesome because you did what you should do. You leaving a spot, if it's a good spot, letting it stew. Let that doe traffic stew until that spot's ready. Going in and off, when you go in and you alter the doe traffic by hunting it 2 or 3 times before that spot's ready to hunt, if the does start coming in after daylight, guess when the bucks are going to come in? Or after, that's when the bucks are going to come in too. If you alter that doe traffic so where they're coming in after dark, that's exactly when the bucks are going to come in. So letting your spots stew until they're ready, it takes a lot of patience, but that's the smart thing to do.
Totally.
It's fantastic. John, I want to talk to you a little bit because not only do you have just amazing knowledge about specific experiences, but you have a long career in hunting now. I wonder what you have seen that has changed over that career. I wonder particularly about hunting pressure. We've heard from previous guests and get the sense ourselves being in the woods that there's a lot more archery pressure these days on public land.
Yeah.
Do you see that? And then have your tactics shifted at all over those years because of the hunting pressure that's changed or not?
Yes and yes. There is far more bow hunting pressure nowadays than there was back in the 70s and 80s. Keep in mind, compound bows came into play in the early 70s. Okay, prior to that, there was not a lot of bow hunters when there was recurve. Okay, so once the compounds came in, bow hunting started becoming really, really popular. But even though there's more pressure on public land nowadays, it's much easier to kill a good buck on public land now than it used to be. Because keep in mind, gun hunters also hunt public land. So, for instance, Michigan used to have 1 million gun hunters back in the 70s, into the early 80s, and in the 60s. And we had probably 250,000 bow hunters. Now we have 350,000 bow hunters, and we have about 600,000 gun hunters. So back in the day when we had 1 million gun hunters, they shot everything. There wasn't any of this let them go, let them grow stuff, okay? If it had 3-inch spikes, that son of a bitch better hide pretty good or he's going to get killed. Okay? Everything got killed. If you shot a 14-inch 8-point that scored 85 inches, it would probably be the biggest buck shot in the county with a bow back in the 70s and 80s. I was a scorer for 35 years. And I would only, in the whole county that I lived in, I'd put 0 to 1 buck in the record. Not me personally. I would score 0 or possibly 1 buck that made the record each year. That's how rare it was. Now it's 20 or 30. So now even the gun hunters, a lot of people are letting 1.5-year-old bucks go. And and there's a decent percentage of bow hunters that are letting 2.5-year-old bucks walk. So there's a lot more big bucks in the woods now than there ever used to be. To give you an idea of how it's still difficult in Michigan on public land, it's still difficult. My son John, his biggest buck in 41 years of bow hunting is 120 inches. Okay, in Michigan, hunting on public land. Okay, so people say, well, he must not be a very good hunter. He's been on 14 trips with me to Kansas or Iowa. And in 14 trips, he's shot 6 bucks between 160. I'm sorry, 4 bucks between 160 and 170. He's shot 8 bucks between 140 and 160. And he shot 2 bucks between 125 and 140. And those are on 1-week hunts. So on all of his out-of-state hunts, he's killed bucks bigger than his smallest one's bigger than the biggest one he shot in Michigan in 41 years of bow hunting public land.
Okay.
That's how different it is. So, Michigan on public land is still extremely difficult to kill a good buck. Also a 120-inch buck here, because we have sandy, loamy soil, that's just not good for growing big antlers. And I'm in northern Michigan. I'm not in southern Michigan. They have better soil. The soil here is just not good for growing big antlers. So it may be a 4.5-year-old buck to have a 120-inch rack. Out west, you can kill a 2.5-year-old buck that's got a 130-inch rack.
Yeah.
So, but if you look at the soil out there, it's black. And you look at their crop yields. The same minerals it takes to grow crops are the same exact minerals it takes to grow bone on an animal, on deer, and make deer big. So, you get into your Illinois, your Iowas, and your Kansases, and your Indianas, Nebraskas. Those guys have twice, the farmers out there have twice the crop yields per acre than what we do in Michigan. And they also, their deer damn near twice as big, and the antlers per age group are twice as big. So, we just happen to be in a poor state for antler growth. And New York and West Virginia, and those northeastern states are kind of in the same boat we are. They just don't have soil that grows big racks and big deer per age group.
Yeah.
Just like southern Wisconsin kills bigger bucks than northern Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the bucks in southern Wisconsin have bigger antlers per same age group as the buck from northern Wisconsin on average.
Yep.
Because the soil.
There you go, Johnny. Your 2 big bucks this year is quite the thing with those stats.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, because we're all
That's
from
awesome.
northern Wisconsin. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
I got three nice bucks this year too. I got one in Michigan, and I went to Indiana, killed one in Indiana, and then that one in Kansas.
Nice.
That's
But
awesome.
you got yours at home. And you got to have your kid kill a first buck. That's awesome too.
Yep.
Make you more excited than yours.
Oh, it was.
I
I was tore up. It was
Yeah.
awesome. Yep. And I had this is an accomplishment in my mind. I had both boys in the blind, and my 7-year-old was trying to screw it up, I think, as much as he possibly could. Yeah. Well, and as soon as the buck walked by our blind at like 8 yards, and I'm like, hey, he's right here, like kind of getting him ready. And my other son, he like stands up and he's like making all this noise, and I grabbed him by the shoulders and I forced him into his seat, and I said, sit down now.
That's the best.
And thankfully my son who shot the buck, we've practiced and practiced and practiced, and this buck wanted to boogie, and he goes, Dad, I'm on him, I'm ready. And I'm like, if you got it behind his shoulder, squeeze it off. He's using a crossbow on a tripod. Yeah. He can't pull a compound yet. And he just made a perfect shot, and it was great.
We got the video on our channel, John. I can send you a link if you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember when my son Chris shot his first deer. He was 11, shot it with a bow, and it was Christmas Day actually. And man, I was just geeked. He was pissed. I put him in a tree. We had about a foot of snow on the ground, and it was it was the day after Christmas. It was the day after Christmas. I put him in a tree, a big white oak, and it was a transition corridor from bedding to feeding. And he shot a button buck, and he hit it in the spine. And it was like 8 yards away. And you know what happens when you shoot a deer in the spine? It falls down and it starts especially a fawn. And he had 3 other arrows, and he shot 2 arrows at it while it was moving around, and he missed. And then the fourth arrow, he hit it through the lungs, and it died. And I told him when he got in the tree, I said, don't get down. I didn't want to get down from the slippery tree until I was there, because I helped him up into it. And an 8-point came by and was sniffing the button buck, and he didn't have any. I had to get down and get him the other arrow.
Oh man,
that's awesome.
But it was kind of shocking that he actually did what I asked him to do and stayed in the tree.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, that was cool. So I know it's
John,
like when your kid kills first deer. I was geeked. Yeah, that was.
John, we want to ask you, it seems like a lot of your success has been being successful and having good relationships with landowners that you have permission on. Could you help us understand your approach a little bit, or how you would coach people in building those relationships or doing the initial ask of like?
Well,
Mm,
in my new book, I actually have a chapter on hunting access, where
Cool.
I have,
nice.
you write a letter or you drop off of when you talk to somebody. If there's any hesitation, you give them the letter. It's got you, your family, you may mention your kids, what organizations you're in locally, whatever, if it's near your house, and say, you know what, if you have to think about it, why don't you take this and, read this, and I'll give you a call or come back later, and, let you and your wife think about it, or you and your husband think about it. And then once I get permission, I've only got 2 pieces. And I've had the same 2 pieces of private land permission now for 20 years. I just haven't asked for anybody from anybody else. So I've had lots of different public lands, and those 2 are the only private places I have in Michigan.
Very cool.
But I build a relationship. Most farmers, I was on my city council where I live for 8 years. I was an elected Republican council member, and I love talking politics. I pay attention to the news, and most farmers are really sharp on politics. They, big farmers, they work in the fields and they work with cows, whatever. And in the evenings they sit down and they watch TV and they watch the news a lot. And I used to think farmers weren't that intelligent, but they're super smart and they love talking about politics. 90% of them are conservative, so we have a lot in common. And I just talk to people. As you can tell, I'm not afraid to talk to people. I've gotten permission. Here's people I've gotten permission. Okay, just to give you an example, I talk to every freaking buddy. If I'm looking for hunting permission mode, I talk to everybody. So I do the letters, I do the notes. If I'm asking permission, I'll leave them a note or a business card or something. But if I'm in a gas station, ask the gas station attendant, the girl that's behind the counter, or the guy that's behind the counter. Hey, you know what? I bow hunt around here. You wouldn't happen to know anybody around here that owns property. Just because she doesn't own property, that doesn't mean she doesn't have an uncle or a grandpa that does.
Right. Yeah.
You just never know. I've gotten permission from gas station attendants once, talking to people in bars when I'm eating lunch. Just, talking to guys sitting up at the counter. They look like they're in their 40s or 50s. There's a feasible chance they might own some property. You strike up a conversation. I can remember when I first tried to get permission in Missouri in 2004. I called the county seat to order plat books. I looked through those big DeLorme maps. You ever see those? Those big red and white map books. And I looked through those, and I found out the counties I wanted to hunt by looking at how many watersheds were going through the counties. Because I knew if I'm going out there after the crops are harvested, the deer, usually watersheds have security cover. So I know if the corn's harvested, that's condensing the deer into those watershed areas. So that's going to be transition corridors. So I would call the counties with the most watersheds that were all, next to each other, and as far as 2 or 3 counties next to each other. And I talked to this one girl that works at the county seat, and I said, hey, you know what? I'm ordering a plat book, but would you happen to know anybody that would let somebody hunt? And she said, I do know this guy that does let people hunt, and she actually gave me his phone number. And I called the guy, and when I told him I was from Michigan, I'd like to come out here bow hunting. I'm kind of looking for some hunting permission, and I hunt by myself. Because when you hunt by yourself, that also lends an air of seriousness. That, this guy's serious. He's by himself. He's not with a bunch of buddies. And anyway, as soon as I asked the guy, he said, well, where did you get my phone number? I said, it's from the girl from the county seat. And he said, well, I'm going to have a talk with her. but anyway, he said, you know what? Because I told him when I wanted to go out there, because their gun season opens the second Saturday in November, which that year was opening November 8th. And I didn't want to go until November 15th because I wanted to suffer with all the Michigan bow hunters here. And then when our gun season opens on November 15th, that's when I like going out of state. So I said, well, I probably won't come out there until the 15th. He said, well, that's going to be right in the middle of our gun season. I said, well, that's okay. I don't mind bow hunting during gun season. So he said, you know what? This guy owns like 3,000 acres. He said, I've got a 40-acre parcel that's not contingent with my other property, and I usually have somebody gun hunting there. But I'm going to let you bow hunt. You sound pretty serious. And he let me hunt that, and nobody else gun hunted on it, and it was 40 acres of bedding area. I mean, it was right up my alley, and I shot a 160-inch 10-point there. It rained all day for 4 days. I shot it on the fourth morning. I sat in the rain.
That's amazing.
3 days in a row, from daylight till dark. You guys probably read that story in one of my books.
Yeah.
Daylight till dark. At fourth morning, the alarm went off at 3 o'clock. I was so freaking tired from sleep deprivation, from sitting all day, 3 days in a row in the rain. And I almost didn't go, but I shot in the, half hour after daybreak on the fourth morning in the rain. You just never know. I've repped for buck knives. You guys all have heard of buck knives? And they were at the time based out of El Cajon, California, which is near San Diego. So I was at a sales meeting out there, and I was sitting around the pool at the hotel talking to one of the customer service ladies, and her name was Nancy, and I said, "Hey, Nancy, you wouldn't, I know what I asked." I said, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Kansas." And I, so the little light went off in my head, and I said, "You wouldn't have any family that still lives out there, would you?" And she said, "No, I don't have any family that lives there, but my brother owns some property out there. He's a bird hunter. He owns some bird hunting property." And I said, "Does he deer hunt?" And she said, "No, he doesn't deer hunt." And I said, "Do you think there's any chance he'd let somebody bow hunt it? Just me, by myself?" So she asked him, and he said, "Yeah." And she gave me his number, and I called him, and I'm still hunting that property. And that was in 2004.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you just never know. The best way to get permission is networking through friends and relatives. You may have relatives that they don't own any property, but they may have friends that own property. You don't know who they know. Your friends are different than their friends. You just never know. And it never hurts to ask. All they can say is,
John?
they can't beat you up, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's true.
Johnny and Jeremiah, do you have any other questions? Otherwise, I got one more, and that'll be
I
our time.
do have one, if you don't mind.
No, go.
Yeah,
Go for it.
it's kind of partly twofold. I feel like, the culture, and I've been tempted to do it myself, but like the culture these days is someone does something once or twice, like say shoot a decent buck at public gun or big buck or whatever, and they're all of a sudden an expert on the topic. But like you've obviously proven otherwise. But my point is, like, when you realized you had something to say? Like, you had done it X amount of times. Was there a specific point you're like, I actually feel like I can teach people or having something to say? The second part of that question is like, what is your why? Like, why you have been extremely, I mean, even you being on this podcast with us is a testament of it, but you've been extremely generous, like we said at the beginning, with your time, your knowledge. You've written books, you've been on podcasts. You're like, why? What is your why, I guess, and wanting to share? I know you probably mentioned at the beginning, but twofold.
No,
When did you realize you had something to kind of say on the topic of deer hunting? What compelled you to want to share it with people?
well, by the mid 1970s, I'd say 1974, I was becoming pretty proficient, and nobody in my family hunted. I'm a self-taught hunter. Okay, nobody in my family hunted. I kind of started out being mentored by an alcoholic that was 35 years old when I was 16. And he used to use me as a guinea pig. He'd always put me in places where they'd wind me and kind of circle around him and be upwind of him in a swamp. He hunted a lot of bedding areas, a swamp guy. But by the mid-70s, I became pretty proficient at killing 2.5-year-old bucks, which back then, like I said, we had so many gun hunters. Killing a 2.5-year-old buck was a big deal. And then I started really paying attention to, Deer and Deer Hunting magazine. There wasn't a whole lot of magazines out there, but I started reading magazines and some regional stuff, and there was just no information that I thought was profound and different. It was everything is typically regurgitated crap, okay? And when I started getting into postseason scouting, I can remember one year I filled my tags early, and I said, you know what? I'm going to go out before the snow falls because all the foliage is down. And I'm going to go out before the snow falls and look at this property. Because now I'm looking at this property with all the foliage down. So now I can see how dense the security cover actually is. Because to me, security cover is what it's all about. If you're not hunting security cover, some semblance of security cover, you're not going to be very successful with any consistency. So I started looking at my property and I could tell, or the areas I was hunting, and I was looking at how dense the security cover was with the foliage down, which is exactly the way it's going to look during rut phases. The foliage is going to be down. So I'm looking at it from the same perspective. And I'm going through and I'm like, okay, wow, I thought looked really thick during preseason. And now it's wide open. And so when I started preparing trees for rut phase hunting during postseason, I was preparing trees for rut phase. I'm looking at the tree with no leaves in it. So when I would be preseason scouting in the past, I'd be looking at a tree that's full of leaves. And if I'm preparing it for the rut phases, I maybe only get up there 16 or 18 feet because when it's got leaves in it, it looks like I've got back cover and some semblance of cover. And then when I'd come back during the rut, I stuck out like a sore thumb because all the leaves are down and I'm too low. So I started preparing trees, looking up into the tree and saying, okay, I need to be up there in that crotch that's 25 feet up in the tree. So I started doing that. Nobody else postseason scouted. I didn't know anybody that postseason scouted. And nobody wrote about it. So I just thought I had something to offer people. So I started writing, and English was my worst subject in school. I almost failed high school because I sucked at it. So I was not a writer. But I just started writing for some local magazines and then some regional magazines. And the more you do something, the better you get at. So I started writing, and people were liking it because I was writing different stuff than what they were used to reading, or what they were different to hearing from their fathers that they were hunting. Because typically, if you're mentored by a parent who's older, typically they're gun hunters, and bow hunting is totally different than gun. They can't mentor you with their gun hunting methods, and assume they're going to work for bow hunting. So I just started writing, and people started liking it, and I just kept stepping it up as I was killing more and bigger bucks, and then I got to the national level, and then people started asking me to do podcasts and seminars, and it just kind of, as long as I consistently stayed successful, I was relevant. So, I've worked very hard at trying to stay relevant.
Has it been fun to do that? Like the keyword, phrase you just said, that you in some way felt, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but felt pressure, or you wanted to obviously keep producing, killing consistently to stay relevant. Have you enjoyed every minute of that? Or has it been a blast every time? Or has it been partly a grind and now you're enjoying some of the success of it? Or has it always been just your passion?
It's always been my passion, but it's definitely a grind. Because I can remember 2017, 18, and 2019, I didn't kill a buck. And I'll tell you what, when you are in, I'm not saying when you're in my position, but to me, being in my position, I feel like I have to perform. But that's pressure I shouldn't put on myself, because when you're hunting public lands and, free permission properties where you're always hunting against competition, you should actually expect to have empty seasons. You should expect to. But having 3 in a row really sucked. I never even saw a shooter in 3 seasons in Michigan. Never saw a buck I shoot. And but then ever since then, I've been knocking down 2 and 3 a year. And then, in the 1900s and the early 2000s, I was knocking down as many as 4 bucks a year. 2 in Michigan and 2 in other states. And 2 to 4 per season on average.
Yeah, that's incredible. Amazing.
So, I think it's kind of interesting, because when I talk to people, they say, John, don't put that much pressure on yourself. You don't have anything to prove anymore. But to me, I feel like I still feel like I have to kill to be relevant. It's just pressure put on myself. And I spent so much time writing those books this last 18 months of, last year and this year, 23 and 24. I didn't even want to deer hunt last year. Last fall, going into deer season, I was burnt out on deer season because all I'd been thinking about every day from daylight till dark was deer hunting and writing about deer hunting.
Well, John, this has been awesome, man. We'd love to have you back. We feel like we just kind of scratched the surface, and this is great. Thanks again for being so generous with your time and your knowledge. I know that we're just 3 hunters among many, many that have experienced a lot more success because you've been generous with your knowledge.
True.
So,
and I can tell you guys are all passionate too. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there's some passion in this room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big time.
Okay.
Hey there, thanks for watching this video. I'm JD, founder and crew member of the Huntxp team. We're so grateful that you took time to watch this video, and hopefully it's helping you level up your hunting game. That's what we in our community is all about, and we want to invite you into this growing community of hunters that's all about leveling up each other's hunting game. So the first thing you can do is like and subscribe, but even more than that, we got some fun things going on over at our website, Huntxp.com. We'd love for you to join our community there and stay connected with what we're doing, what we're working on, and we'd love to hear about what you're after. So thank you for watching this video. We'll see you next time.